Good evening. I'm Teresa Skupik, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, December 17th. The Federal Finance Department has a new face in charge after Chrystia Freeland's sudden resignation from cabinet yesterday. Dominic LeBlanc was sworn in as finance minister last night and says his main priority will be to address affordability issues. Mr. LeBlanc is also in charge of intergovernmental affairs and democratic institutions, and he will continue to oversee the public safety file, implementing new border measures until Prime Minister Justin Trudeau holds a broader cabinet shuffle to replace ministers who have announced they won't seek re-election. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did not speak to reporters as he left an evening Liberal caucus meeting, and while walking to his motorcade, a group of protesters bombarded him outside.
King Trudeau, what gives you the right to continue? What gives you the right to stay in office? You failed Canada. You've ruined our country. You're done. Walk away. You don't have an ounce of your father's integrity. At least he walked in the snow. You've ruined this country. Everyone around you is running from you. They're abandoning you. Chrystia Freeland, Sean Fraser, they've all left you. It's time for you to go. It's time for Canada to have an election. You're not the king.
It came after Mr. Trudeau lost his deputy prime minister in a shocking resignation from cabinet and an open letter posted on social media in which Ms. Freeland acknowledged that she's been at odds with Mr. Trudeau over the past few weeks. Facing more calls for his resignation, Mr. Trudeau told a crowd of Liberals, quote, "It was obviously an eventful day and it has not been an easy day."
It's obviously been an eventful day and it has not been an easy day. But I wanted to come here tonight and speak with you, dedicated, devoted members of the Liberal Party, because you, not me or any other politician, are the beating heart of this movement. These are great things, and I cannot emphasize enough just how damn proud I am of what we have done over the past 9 years, and it's because of you. Because of volunteers, community leaders, and donors. Because of every single person who has stepped up for this cause, for this movement, for this party.
Mr. Trudeau remains steadfast in his position after he was called to resign by NDP leader Jagmeet Singh and was asked to call a confidence vote by Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Government House Leader Karina Gold tabled the fall economic statement document hours after Ms. Freeland's resignation, showcasing a deficit for 2023 to 2024 at $61.9 billion. That's almost $22 billion more than forecast last spring. Among the highlights of new measures included in the plan is a decision to reinstate a temporary change to the capital cost allowance. That allows businesses to make larger tax deductions for capital costs up front. The statement also included a promise to spend $1.3 billion over 6 years on border security. However, Ottawa still won't say exactly how that money will be spent. As Canadians watched a day of considerable political turmoil for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his government, it appears that U.S. President-elect Donald Trump was also watching it unfold. The incoming U.S. president posted on his Truth Social platform last night that, quote, "The great state of Canada is stunned as the finance minister resigns or was fired from her position by Governor Justin Trudeau." Mr. Trump added that Ms. Freeland's behavior was totally toxic and that she won't be missed. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says all the provincial and territorial leaders will remain united as Team Canada in the face of a tariff threat from the U.S., despite what he calls the current chaos in Ottawa.
Look, it's been a very, very busy day today. Today has been an important reminder of how critical it is that premiers work together. No matter what's happening in Ottawa, all of us premiers will remain united as Team Canada to provide steady and stable leadership during these uncertain times in Ottawa. Families, workers, businesses, communities are counting on us to do so, and we'll be there for them.
The agenda of the Premier's meeting in Toronto yesterday was to include the discussion of a threat from Donald Trump to impose a 25% tariff import on goods coming from Canada and Mexico when he takes office. Mr. Ford says it's critical that the Premiers take a bigger role and assured Canadians that they will provide steady and stable leadership. All right, stay tuned. Up next, the Conservatives win Monday's by-election in the BC riding of Cloverdale-Langley City. And a judge finds that Donald Trump does not have presidential immunity regarding his hush money convictions. We'll have these stories and more news right after the break. Stay with us. In another blow to the Liberals last night, the party was unable to retain a British Columbia seat left vacant when Liberal John Aldag resigned this summer to run provincially for the NDP. The Conservatives won Monday's federal by-election in the BC riding of Cloverdale-Langley City. Conservative Tamara Jansen will return to Ottawa as MP for the riding she last represented from 2019 to 2021. Conservative strategist Anthony Kosh joined us to explain the significance of the Tory win.
So first and foremost, we got a 23-point swing from the Liberals to the Conservatives in this riding. It is a riding that the Conservatives did manage to win in the past. So these are the kind of places that you would expect to flip to the Conservatives in the event of a victory. I think what's so shocking is the size of the win, and also the fact that this now represents, the third or the fourth by-election in a row where a Liberal incumbent gets absolutely trounced. Now, the Liberals are obviously going to point towards the fact that turnout was an abysmal 16%. Now, that definitely does play into it. But any time you get shellacked in a riding the way they just did, and the Conservatives receive 66% of the vote, regardless of turnout, it's an indicator that things are going very poorly for you. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. The events of yesterday, the by-election under normal circumstances would be a top 3 story. Yesterday was probably story number 7. Just because of all the stuff that went down between Chrystia Freeland's resignation and all the festivities around that, the fall economic statement that was, then wasn't, then still was, $62 billion deficit, just a horrible day for the Liberals. It's the same thing I said, right? Usually, on a normal day, a government announces a $62 billion deficit. They no longer have the COVID excuse either, right? We're not in the pandemic anymore. There's no historically unprecedented scenario that we're all facing. That's your top line headline that you're trying to fight against. But yesterday was so bad, $62 billion, probably third or fourth on the hierarchy of horrible things that were going on.
Canada's annual inflation rate was 1.9% in November, down a tick from 2% in October. Statistics Canada announced the new numbers this morning. The update says shelter costs increased at a slower annual pace of 4.6%. Rent price inflation, meanwhile, accelerated to 7.7%. And as most people could agree, grocery prices continue to grow faster than overall prices, rising 2.6% from a year ago. The Bank of Canada is preparing for a more uncertain and shock-prone future. And the Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem made a speech to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, saying structural changes are underway in the world.
Today, inflation is back at our 2% target. Last week, we cut our policy rate by 50 basis points to 3.25%, the 5th consecutive decrease since June. We've come a long way in 2 years. Monetary policy has worked to restore low inflation. Interest rates have come down substantially, and household spending has begun to pick up. But I'm not here to give a victory speech. Price stability is low, stable inflation. Inflation is low once again. Now we need to stabilize it around the 2% target. That's price stability. That's giving Canadians the confidence that their cost of living will not change materially year to year.
To prepare, Mr. Macklem says that Canada's central bank is readying for this future, learning from the lessons of the pandemic and its aftermath. A U.S. judge has rejected a bid by incoming President Donald Trump to throw out his hush money criminal conviction. The judge's decision concerns Mr. Trump's arguments that focus on the U.S. Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling this summer. Mr. Trump was convicted in May of falsifying business records related to a $130,000 hush money payment to porn actress Stormy Daniels in 2016. The Manitoba government is projecting a deficit for the year that is higher than expected.
We've got more work to do. There's always more work to do and continuing to improve. But what we know is that this is a massive improvement over what we were left. And it shows that steady progress towards our balanced budget goal in that final mandate year.
It expects to post a deficit of $1.3 billion for the fiscal year, up from the $796 million that was tabled in the 2023 to 2024 budget. Finance Minister Adrian Salas says that the government is still promising to balance the budget by 2027.
Seeing about $700 million in progress relative to public accounts from last year is a big improvement. It shows our commitment to moving forward and delivering on our balanced budget goal. And again, that's not only good news on that front, but we're also seeing, in addition to that $700 million improvement relative to public accounts last year, a number of really great indicators that our economy is really taking off.
All right, stay with us. Coming up, we'll be speaking to an American that was detained under the Assad regime in Syria for over 60 days. Our interview with Sam Goodwin, author of Saving Sam, will be right after the break. Stay tuned. Since the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, new reports have emerged of prisoners being released where they were prisoners for upwards of 40 years. The most notorious of Assad's prisons were referred to as a human slaughterhouse, where countless people were imprisoned without due process and never seen again. In fact, the jailing of dissidents and journalists was incredibly common in Assad Syria. And as the country turns a new chapter, the people of Syria hope that these human rights violations come to a halt. Sam Goodwin, the author of Saving Sam, is an American who was unjustly held in Syria's prison system for more than 60 days, and he joins us now to discuss what he experienced. Sam, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Teresa.
Now, as more of these prisoners are released, we are hearing just absolutely horrific stories of what the prison system was like under Assad. But what did you experience for more than the 60 days that you were in prison there?
Well, my first month I was held in solitary confinement in branch 215. I was in a cell that was all concrete. It had no windows. I had nothing but a small blanket to lay on the concrete floor as a bed. So that's just a quick snapshot of a little bit of what I experienced.
Now, what brought you to Syria? Why were you imprisoned? And how exactly were you freed?
From 2010 to 2020, in those 10 years, of much of which I spent living and working overseas in Singapore and Dubai, I traveled every country in the world. And it was on this journey that I went to Syria. And when I arrived, just 2 hours later, I was kidnapped off the street. I was accused of espionage, of being an American spy, of collaborating with terrorists, and things got extremely uncomfortable. And I was held for 2 months, for 63 days. And thank God, thanks to a long list of people who worked tirelessly, my situation ended peacefully. And although many authorities or agencies were involved, from the US government and CIA, the Pentagon, Middle East NGOs, private sector security companies, the list goes on. It was actually my family who managed to connect with the head of Lebanon's internal security, who was able to mediate my release with his counterparts in Damascus, and just puts a lot into perspective, and couldn't be more grateful.
Now, as I mentioned previously, you released a book titled Saving Sam, and we touched on obviously some of the horrors that you faced. But in your book, you also talk about how you turn adversities into assets. Would you mind explaining how you found a light at the end of the tunnel when not many people could experience what you did and almost find some positivity in it?
Yeah, on one hand, this book includes this travel journey to every country in the world, heads of state, high stakes diplomacy. Uh, on the other hand, though, and I think more importantly, it is, as you mentioned, about what we all learn through this experience that we believe can help others today. It's about how we can all turn our own challenges and adversities into assets and opportunities. And I don't want to be known for the things that happen to me. I want to be known for the way I've responded to them. And I hope that this book will equip readers to adopt a similar mindset and implement it into their own personal, professional, and spiritual lives.
Now, I can't even begin to understand what your family was also going through. And you did just touch on the fact that they played a huge role in you coming home. What was their reaction to finally getting you back?
One of the most overwhelming things for me when I was released was learning about everything that happened on the outside while I was trapped on the inside, none of which I knew anything about. And today Teresa, it's more than 5.5 years later, and I'm still saying thank you to people. I'm still learning about people who talked to a friend or made a phone call or said a prayer, whatever it may be. And it just puts a lot into perspective. And it's still a half a decade later here. And I'm still learning about these things and saying thank you.
Now, you've mentioned that you don't want to be remembered for the horrible things you went through, but how are you finding ways to, I don't want to say forget, but remove yourself from those situations and continue to be able to move forward?
I think we're all stronger and more resilient than we can imagine, and uncertain times are exactly what we need in order to grow. And that's really the mindset that I've been trying to focus on today. This was an incredibly challenging time, but truly there's been so much good that's come from it. And that's what I'm trying to focus on today. And that's what my family and I are trying to focus on today.
Now, we do just have under a minute left, but what do you make of the mass release of prisoners since the fall of the Assad regime?
Well, I'm thrilled, and many of the people who I came to know in prison are now free, and I'm in touch with them. And what happens next for the Syrian people, in my view, may be good, it may be bad, but regardless, it will be better than Assad. And I'm optimistic about a brighter future for the country.
All right, don't go anywhere. Coming up after the break, we'll have more of today's top national and international headlines. TikTok's parent company asked the U.S. Supreme Court to block the law banning the social media platform in the U.S. Canada Post resumes operations after a month-long strike by 55,000 unionized workers, and the housing crisis is named Canadian Press's news story of the year. We'll have these stories and more news from around the world when we return. Stay with us. The critical shortage of available and affordable housing is the 2024 Canadian Press news story of the year. Editors across the country say that housing was a story in every community in Canada. Record population growth pushed by rapid increases in immigration pushed up rents and home prices as new home starts could not keep up with demand. Every level of government has been seized with the issue throughout the year, prompting an official adjustment to immigration targets as well as major housing investments from the federal Liberals. TikTok is asking the U.S. Supreme Court to step in on an emergency basis to block the law banning the popular platform in the U.S. unless its China-based parent company agrees to sell it. Company lawyers and China-based ByteDance urged the justices to act before the law's January 19th deadline. Before a meeting with the app's CEO, President-elect Donald Trump addressed the matter in a press conference.
Stop the ban on TikTok next month?
We'll take a look at TikTok. You know, I have a warm spot in my heart for TikTok because I won youth by 34 points. And there are those that say that TikTok had something to do with that. Now, Joe Rogan did, and some of the other people that were recommended by my son Barron, he knew names. I said, who is that? Tell me, who's that? Dad, you got to be kidding. I can't believe you don't know. And I did those interviews, and it was actually sort of cute. Do you want to know the truth? But we did them, and that had an impact. But TikTok had an impact, and so we're taking a look at it.
Content creators who rely on the platform for income and some of TikTok's more than 170 million users in the U.S. are expected to file a separate plea. Yael Osowski from the Consumer Choice Center joined us to explain what happens next if the Supreme Court declines the request.
Earlier this month, TikTok took its case to an appeals court in Washington, D.C., and they lost. And they tried to appeal, they lost again, and now they're asking the U.S. Supreme Court, which is the ultimate authority in the land, to figure out whether by January 19th they would have to follow the law and sell their U.S. assets to some U.S.-based company. This is in line with the law that President Biden passed earlier this year. And if the Supreme Court does not decide to take up an appeal, that means that by January 19th, the company would have to sell its assets in the U.S. to a U.S. company. If that's not done, that means that any app store that's carrying the app will be fined exorbitant amount of money. Realistically, that means that TikTok would have to find some kind of US-based buyer by that date. I don't really see this going through the Supreme Court. They've tried to bring this up on First Amendment grounds, but that's not what the case has really been about. So we're going to probably see a lot of action about it, a lot of ink spilled. But fortunately, I think what's going to happen is a forced sale of TikTok US to some company based either in the United States or some other liberal democracy.
Canada Post resumed operations this morning after a crippling month-long strike by 55,000 unionized postal workers. The Canada Industrial Relations Board ordered workers back to work after weekend hearings determined both sides were too far apart to reach a deal by the end of the year. However, CUP-W is challenging the government's intervention to end the strike and extend the union's last contracts until May for further bargaining. Canada Post warns customers should expect delays into the new year as it works through backlogs. A lawyer for Jay-Z says a rape claim against the rap music giant and husband of singer Beyoncé is provably, demonstrably false. This comes after a woman told NBC News last week that she was sexually assaulted at the age of 13 by Jay-Z and Sean Diddy Combs at an MTV Music Awards afterparty in 2000. Jay-Z's lawyer Alex Spiro says the account relied on an impossible timeline at a location that doesn't exist.
We expect Mr. Carter to be fully cleared of all of this in the coming days. Almost nothing that she says has checked out because this never happened. She's doubled down on certain of these details. She says, I'm positive. She points out the tattoo. She talks about the tattoo in vivid detail. Turns out that's completely false. And the father is supposed to be picking her up. 10-hour drive round trip to pick her up in the middle of the night. Has no memory of that. No one has come forward about this in nearly a quarter of a century, and that's because this never happened.
Terry Fox will soon appear on the Canadian $5 bill. The federal government's budget document described Fox, who campaigned to raise awareness and funding for cancer research by running the Marathon of Hope, as a Canadian hero. Mr. Fox campaigned for cancer research after losing a leg to the disease by running his Marathon of Hope starting in 1980. He raised $24 million before his death in 1981, and an annual run in his name has gone on to raise more than $850 million for cancer research. I'm Teresa Skubic, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca. Good night, Canada.